Part 4. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 31. At dusk, Su Buling arrived with his carriage outside the White Horse village in the snowy fields. He could see a series of buildings in the distance. 4 lanterns under the big archway swayed in the cold wind, and the lights between the eaves and green tiles were like daylight. From time to time, there were people dressed in noble clothes entered it in cars and horses. Zhu Manzi sat next to him and looked up into the distance. "Mr. Su, there are imperial guards around. Could it be that Bama village has been alerted?" Su Buling pulled on his bamboo hat and said in a calm voice, "They are all the same." Zhu Manzi seemed to understand, nodded slightly, then turned to look at the car curtain, and tapped on the car with his hand. "Master Xiao, we've arrived." Yeah, ouch." There was a confused sound, and there was a plop sound in the carriage, and it sounded like someone had fallen off the soft couch. Zhu Manzi smiled and quickly covered his mouth. After a while, the sleepy Xiao Ting poked his head out of the carriage, raised his eyes to look at Zhuangzi in the distance, and his eyes lit up. "Oh, this place is quite beautiful. No wonder those dandy boys often talk about it." "No, how did you find this place? If it's fun, I'll treat you tonight." Su Buling tilted his head and glanced. "I have private matters today. You can play with me when you get in. No matter what happens, don't reveal my identity." Okay, don't get into trouble and get me involved." Xiao Ting sat back angrily and began to persuade with earnest words. "No, you don't want to be as prudish as a hypocrite. I know that you have not been smart since you were a child, and you feel inferior when you stay with talented people and beauties. You have to be more open-minded. Your identity as the Crown Prince of Su is here. Come and eat and drink freely. Just for fun, even if you fart, they all think it tastes good, and how dare someone say that yours is not good." When Zhu Manzi heard these words, his expression was very awkward. He wanted to laugh but dared not. Su Buletinling frowned and insisted on beating Xiao Ting half to death according to his temper. But if Xiao Ting was left alive today, he could only pretend that he had not heard this persuasion. The carriage arrived at the entrance of Bama village, and the steward who was waiting under the archway came up to him. After looking at the wooden sign with the word Xiao hanging on the carriage, his expression suddenly changed, and he stood respectfully under the carriage and waited quietly. Su Buling jumped out of the carriage, covering his face tightly with a bamboo hat, and raised his hand to open the curtain. In the carriage, Xiao Ting, whose temperament changed completely, slowly bent over and walked out holding a folding fan. Xiao Ting was born into a well-established family, and his appearance is naturally good. His manners have been cultivated since childhood, and he can be considered dignified when it comes to seriousness. The steward took a look and suddenly became frightened. "Oh, it turns out to be Mr. Xiao. I'm a little disappointed." Then he turned around and waved, quickly, "Ask Mr. Chao to come out to greet the guests. Prime Minister Xiao's son is here." Xiao Ting was not surprised by this. He stood on the carriage and pondered for a while. It seemed that he wanted to write a poem and set it up. Unfortunately, he held it in for a long time without uttering a single word. He coughed lightly and got off the carriage. Within a moment, a young man came out of the village. He was dressed in fine clothes and had a warm smile. He was Li Tianyu, Li Tianlu's cousin, who was usually responsible for the property of Bama village. Xiao Ting, as the legitimate son of the Xiao family in Huainan, Li Tianlu had to bow down to greet him here, not to mention a collateral descendant like Li Tianyu. At this time, Li Tianyu was smiling all over his face. He stepped forward and raised his hand to salute. "Tianyu has met young Master Xiao. My brother has invited young Master many times. Today young Master Xiao is willing to show his favor, which really makes this humble house shine." Xiao Ting put the folding fan behind his back, acting like a leader inspecting, and consciously walked at the front. My father has always been considerate of the people's sentiments. It just so happened that I had nothing to do today. I came over to see the harvest. Zhu Manzi, who was walking side by side with Su Buling and followed in, opened his eyes wide after hearing this and looked at the heavy snow in the sky. Come to see the harvest in the middle of winter? Damn if you can see that. Su Buling was not surprised. After all, with Xiaoting's social status of not working hard and not distinguishing grains, he still couldn't see anything in autumn. When Li Tianyu and the manager heard this, they didn't show any embarrassment on their faces and answered naturally. Master Xiao is really thoughtful. He loves his people like a son at a young age. In the future, when he goes to court and pays homage to the Prime Minister, my people in Daia will be blessed. Excuse me, well, Zhuangzi has done a good job in cultivation. They all say that General Li is a Confucian general. Now it seems that what he said is true. Where? While the people in the sedan chair were carrying people and complimenting each other, Li Tianyu led Xiaoting to the interior of Zhuangzi. Su Buling led the carriage, and Zhu Manzi was dressed like a little country girl, so she was naturally regarded as the coachman and a maid. Halfway through, the steward behind politely pointed to the place where the carriage was parked in the village, and motioned for the servants to go there. While waiting, Su Buling naturally took Zhu Manzi with him and left the team. Zhu Manzi followed Su Buling towards the stable and turned his head to look at Xiaoting, who was walking away. Mr. Su, just now I saw the man surnamed Li winking at the steward. It seemed something was wrong. Is there something wrong with Mr. Xiao? Danger. Su Buling tied the horse to the stake, shook his head and smiled. If the Li family dares to kill the legitimate son of the Xiao family in Huainan, the whole family will be buried with him. It will be very safe. Zhu Manzi nodded. He was born in the market and naturally didn't understand the affairs of a wealthy family. He asked curiously. I often hear people say Xiao Lu Kui Wang Li, how powerful is the Xiao family? Su Buling thought for a while. Daqi has occupied the Central Plains for 300 years. There are more than 200 prime ministers and more than 30 surnamed Xiao. The remaining half were divided by the other 4 families. The situation is similar in our dynasty. Do you think there are how awesome? The Xiao family is so powerful, why did they give birth to such a stupid son? Well, foolish people are blessed. Su Buring didn't waste any time talking about the tool man. He looked around a few times with a long knife on his back. There were many horses and carriages parked near the stables, and the coachman and guards were sitting around the brazier chatting. Depending on the situation, they often met him. Very familiar. The Li family's guards patrolled around with their swords in hand, glancing this way from time to time. Su Buling naturally had no intention of becoming a coachman. After thinking about it for a while, he took Zhu Manzi's wrist and walked towards the corner behind the stable. Zhu Manzi was looking around to see what was wrong, when his wrist was suddenly pulled, his face turned red and his expression became a little contorted. Su, Mr. Su, what are you doing? Don't talk. Su Buling responded with a smile, and took Zhu Manzi to the passage between the wall and the stable. After making sure that outsiders could not see here, he raised his chin. Turn around and lie on the wall. Zhu Manzi was stunned, turned around with puzzled eyes, and lay obediently on the wall. Then Zhu Manzi heard a rustling sound and turned around in confusion, only to see Prince Su unfastening his belt. Ah! Zhu Manzi finally understood, feeling angry and ashamed. Just when he wanted to speak, he was pressed against the courtyard wall. At this moment, a guard with a knife walked outside the passage and looked at it with a frown. Su Buling pressed Zhu Manzi against the wall and was unbuttoning his belt with one hand. When he saw someone coming, he stopped and said angrily, "What are you looking at? He looks like an evil guard having an affair with a good maid." Zhu Manzi also reacted and hurriedly covered his face, looking shy. The guard with the knife looked a little embarrassed, touched his nose, and left as if he hadn't seen anything. Only then did Su Buling let go of his hand, took off his bamboo hat and covered his face with a black scarf. "Let's go in and have a look." Zhu Manzi's face was still red, and he followed Su Buling towards Zhuangzi, stretched out his hand, and whispered. "Mr. Su, you have a lot of bad ideas, and you can think of all these ways." "I'm offended." "Don't offend, Su Shizi is very skilled in catching girls. Dash. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 32. Bema Manor is the private property of the Li family. After years of construction and renovation, it is no longer mainly based on farming. Instead, it is similar to a modern farmhouse, a place for the rich and powerful in Chang'an City to have fun. There are many brothels and gambling houses in Chang'an City. To make money from these wealthy people, you naturally have to do some tricks that you can't see elsewhere. Xiaoting came rashly and it was his first time. Although Li Tianyu knew that this gentleman's brain was not worthy of his status, he still had to be on guard. He just took Xiaoting to the main house, where there were beauties and wine to accompany him. It was not much different from an ordinary place for entertainment, so there was nothing to say. In a garden deep in Bema Manor, the rockery built with strange stones was quite beautiful. There were many guards with swords walking back and forth around the rockery. They were restrained and much stronger than the guards at the entrance of the manor. There is a cave under the rockery. People in fancy clothes go in from time to time. You can hear a faint noise coming from underground. "Dad, do you think that Eagle Finger Wanderer will come today?" In the huge underground palace under the rockery, many people are sitting in the compartments around it. In the middle is a martial arts arena with thick railings around it, which looks like a huge cage. Zhu Qingli's face is pale. He sits outside the huge cage and keeps looking around. Zhu Manlong sits on the armchair with a teacup, and Zhang Chao is next to him. Thugs in guard uniforms are everywhere in the underground palace. Hearing his son's question, Zhu Manlong snorted lightly, "With my father and Master Zhang here, I am 100% sure that he will never come back." Zhu Qingli nodded, his expression a little uneasy, which may be related to if you don't do bad things, you won't be afraid of ghosts knocking on the door. If you do bad things, you will naturally be a little suspicious. In the huge cage in front of Zhu Qingli, beast roars were heard from time to time. A yellow-striped tiger roared in the iron bars of the huge cage against the wall. Its scarlet pupils contained the beastly nature brought by hunger, and it scanned the many sources of the shouts outside the cage. The people sitting in the surrounding compartments could not see who they were, but Zhu Qingli could hear the voices of several people. They were all wealthy and powerful people in Chang'an City. At this time, with some excitement, they threw gold and silver ingots into the tray of the steward and shouted, "Hurry up, hurry up." Although it was the first time for Zhu Qingli to come, he had already guessed what to do quickly. The Zhu family opened a martial arts school, providing guards for many wealthy families, and also did dirty work for those wealthy families, such as robbing land and beating with clubs. At a cocktail party last year, he met Li Tianlu. After making friends a few times, Li Tianlu gave him a lucrative job, to capture some insignificant people and send them to Bema village. What kind of people would the government not investigate? Bema Zhuang is a farm. Zhu Qingli thought that the landlord was looking for illegal workers to farm the land, so he readily agreed. The Zhu family backed many gambling houses in the city. Every day, there were gamblers who lost everything and still owed money. They turned against their families and no one cared. Zhu Qingli naturally took people to tie up those who owed money to the gambling houses and sent them to Bema Zhuang. After more than a year, no one even reported to the authorities. Zhu Qingli made a lot of money from this, and he always wondered why the Li family didn't just give money to recruit long-term workers. It wasn't until today that he realized that all the people he sent went to see the King of Hell. This underground palace is an underground gambling house, where people fight beasts and bet on wins and losses. The hungry tiger in the cage is not big, a little tiger weighing about 200 pounds, but it is still a tiger no matter how small it is. Zhuchengli thought he had no ability to fight alone. How could he fight those gamblers who couldn't even eat enough when they lost? The cage was not ready yet, but Zhuchengli could not sit still. After all, he was the one who caught the man. But thugs have their own rules. Whatever the financier does, the Zhu family has to do it after receiving the money, and has no right to interfere. Ah! A deafening tiger roar sounded in the cage, and the yellow-striped tiger was stirring behind the iron fence, bringing up the dust. The sound of the iron chain came from the gate on the side of the cage against the wall. The people sitting in the surrounding compartments suddenly shouted, and several pot-bellied officials even stood at the window of the compartment and lifted the bead curtain to watch. Click. The sound of the mechanism sounded, and a gate on the wall opened, and two ragged men were thrown out directly, among whom was Sankei, the clerk of the Sun family shop. "Let me out. Help." The two men climbed up from the sandy ground and turned around to run back. Unfortunately, the fence was closed, so they could only cry and shout on it, not daring to look at the iron bars next to them. Perhaps to increase the chances of the two men winning, a knife and a spear were thrown out from behind the fence. Outside the cage, the steward knocked the gong with a clang. "Start." Clatter. The iron bars were slowly lifted up, and the yellow-striped tiger inside, which had been hungry for 3 days, had saliva in its mouth, and was anxiously and angrily clinging to the iron bars to squeeze out. "Damn it, pick up the knife. Kill this reptile, and I'll reward you with 1,000 taels." The shouts were like a tide, and everyone stared at them intently. The two ragged men in the cage first collapsed to the ground and crawled around looking for an exit. Seeing that the yellow-striped tiger's head had already emerged from under the iron bars, the desperate desire to survive still took over. The two men, who looked as pale as death, crawled and picked up their knives and guns, and leaned against the edge of the cage tremblingly. "Come together. How can we fight separately? Go together, it's like killing a pig, and find an opportunity to stab it to death later." The spectators from all directions leaned on the railings, anxiously and excitedly urging and shouting, and they looked like they wished they could go up there instead. Ah! With a tiger roar that resounded through the underground palace, the yellow-striped tiger broke free from the cage, and the tiger's paw stepped on the sand, bringing up dust and muffled sounds. It jumped nearly 10 feet and rushed to the edge of the cage in the blink of an eye. Ah! The screams rang out immediately. The two men had just mustered a little courage, but after seeing the ferocity of the hungry tiger, they had already disappeared, and they just ran away in all directions. The man who ran slower had 4 deep scars on his back torn by the huge tiger claws. He only had time to scream desperately, and his neck fell into the tiger's mouth, and the sound stopped abruptly. The remaining 3 talents had already lost their souls and spirits, and even threw their knives on the ground, and they just ran away from the big tiger. After the hungry tiger killed 1 person, it did not mean to stop and take the knife, and chased after the 3 talents relentlessly. "Why are you running, you bastard? Get your knife. Coward, I'll bet you 100 taels of silver." The scolding was everywhere. The gamblers who live at the bottom of the market are mostly lazy and can't even outrun a normal man, let alone outrun a tiger. Sankei had been carrying sacks for half a year, and the food in the Sun family shop was good, so he ran very fast at this time. But if he couldn't kill the yellow-striped tiger, he would just live a few more breaths. Zhuchengli had a guilty conscience, and he couldn't bear it at this time. "Dad, ask the steward to stop. This is not a fight between a man and a tiger, this is taking human life for fun, it's too bad for the yin virtue." Zhu Manlong held the teacup and didn't speak. Zhang Chao next to him looked indifferent. "Life and death are determined by fate, it's your own fault, who can you blame? Help me." In the cage, San Ke cried and roared crazily, his legs left after images, trying to stay away from the tiger that was getting closer and closer behind him. In vain. The spectators around had already stood up, cursing, and were obviously very dissatisfied with this big show. Just as the yellow-striped tiger flew out and bit San Ke's neck with its bloody mouth, a loud roar suddenly rang out in the underground palace. Dead beast! The sound was like thunder, almost drowning out the noise of the whole audience, and echoed in the underground palace. The teacup in Zhu Manlong's hand trembled slightly, and his eagle eyes suddenly focused and looked at the stone entrance of the underground palace. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 33. Outside the rockery of Bama village, Su Buling knocked out several guards and quickly led Zhu Manzi into the stone path leading to the underground. The stone path is very wide, and there are torches along the path. The door in front is open, and the cage in the center of the underground palace can be seen in the distance. Zhu Manzi looked from a distance and happened to see the scene of a tiger killing a man. He was so shocked that his face turned pale and he almost screamed. As a police officer of the imperial court, even though he had only been working as a police officer for half a year, Zhu Manzi's character was extremely upright, otherwise he would not have gone to investigate Fumanlu alone, and would not give in to the commander of the Royal Forest Army. In her heart, Daya was strict in discipline and law, and the court was considerate of the people. Although she hid some rat shit, she was more of a person like Prince Su who could distinguish right from wrong. Zhu Manzi never imagined that someone would actually do such a disgusting thing at the emperor's feet, feeding people to tigers. Stop! Zhu Manzi held up her skirt and wanted to run over to stop him, but Tiger couldn't understand human speech, so he couldn't stop him. Su Buling raised his eyes and saw this scene, his face darkened. He slammed his boots on the ground, jumped nearly 10 feet, raised his hand and removed the long knife from his back. The black cloth wrapped around it fell apart, revealing the blade as black as ink. The knife is like black tide, and the edge is like silver thread. Su Buling dragged the knife with both hands and scratched a white line on the stone slab on the ground. Amidst the harsh scratching sound, a bang sounded. Dead beast! Su Buling, who was wearing a tight black suit with his face covered, jumped up to the top of the cage fence in 3 large steps. He used his feet on the top of the fence to jump high into the cage. He held a knife in both hands and slashed down with the force of a mountain. The yellow-striped tiger's instinctive sense of crisis made it stop. A low roar sounded from its throat. When its scarlet pupils looked at the source of the sound, the blade was already in front of it. Wipe! The blade was as fast as black thunder, slashing a half-moon in the air, slicing diagonally across the yellow-striped tiger's neck. The blade struck 3 inches into the ground as blood spattered. The force was so great that the black clothes on the back of Su Buletin's arms suddenly tore apart, revealing the strong and bulging muscles underneath. Before Hungry Tiger could even react, his head left his body and hit the ground. Nyoda's body fell forward, blood spurted out from the broken hole, and the sandy ground was dyed red in an instant. Kill the tiger with 1 sword. Wow! There was a lot of noise in the underground palace, and countless wealthy gentry who were about to leave burst into cheers. Outside the cage, Zhang Chao and Zhu Manlong both stood up. When the stewards and thugs of the Li family saw someone ruining the cage show, they were stunned for a moment and then yelled angrily. What a courage! Who are you? Su Buletin Ling's chest heaved, and the anger in his eyes could not be restrained, and he looked coldly at the people around him. San Ke, who was covered in tiger blood, was almost scared to death. He sat on the ground and backed away on his hands and knees. After taking a few steps back and finding that the tiger had been killed, he seemed to have seen a savior again. He knelt and crawled towards Su Buling. Hero! Hero, save me. Su Buling turned his head and his eyes turned cold. San Kei's cry for help stopped suddenly, and his pupils shrank slightly, showing unspeakable fear. Because the eyes of the person in front of him are even more terrifying than the hungry tiger full of animality just now. Wipe. The knife fell from the hand. Before San Kei could even open his mouth to beg for mercy, the blade swept past his eyes. The head flew high, blood spurted out, and the headless body fell to the ground. The noise just now stopped abruptly, and Zhu Manlong and others looked inexplicably, even incredulously. Zhu Manzi's eyes were wide open, her red mouth opened and closed, and she was also stunned on the spot. Just now, I tried my best to rush over to save the person. Why did I kill the person with a knife after saving the person? This was not an unnecessary move. Su Buling was naturally not an unnecessary move. He held the 4-foot-long knife dripping with blood and looked around the venue. His voice was cold. A bunch of bastards. They take pleasure in watching other people suffering. Do they deserve to be called human beings? A steward of the Li family was furious and yelled across the fence. These people owe money and have signed life and death certificates. Wipe. Before the steward finished speaking, Su Buling kicked a knife on the ground with the toe of his boot. The blade flew out with a sound of breaking wind, and directly nailed the open steward to the wall behind. There was an uproar. For those present, the cage is a dead person, and if you kill it, you will kill it. If you are a good person who comes out to disrupt the situation, it will only be a matter of paying money afterwards. Many onlookers just saw it happily, and maybe they can say something nice. The person who killed the Li family is not someone who can be kind. Zhu Manlong and Zhang Chao stood up and shouted in unison. You are brave. Su Buling walked to the edge of the fence with the knife and ignored Zhu Manlong and others. The state has national laws, and families have family rules. These people deserve to be killed by the court. If the court cannot kill them, I will kill them. Who do you think you are? You dare to kill people on behalf of the court in this way? What a crazy boy. How dare you make trouble in Bama village? The surrounding guard stewards were furious. The steward opened the chains of the cage, and 7 or 8 knife-wielding guards rushed in. Zhu Manzi suddenly became anxious and got into the cage without thinking. Before anyone could react, he ran to Su Buling, took out the wolf guard sign from his arms, and said loudly. Bold. I am from the wolf guard. You know he is. Halfway through the words, Su Buling pulled Zhu Manzi, who was wearing a coat and skirt, behind him, holding a long knife in one hand and looking contemptuously. Just a few of you. Zhu Manzi was stunned for a moment, and seeing that Su Buling did not want to reveal his identity, she did not say anything more. Zhu Manzi's wrist was pulled, and she hid behind Su Buling. She was shorter than Su Buling. She looked up at the back of the man holding a knife and facing the enemies. For some reason, her heart skipped a beat. The 7 or 8 knife-wielding thugs who rushed in hesitated for a moment when they saw the token of the wolf guard. Zhu Manlong, who was invited to watch the scene, also entered the cage. Zhang Chao next to him was full of anger and was ready to take the lead. Zhu Manlong hurriedly raised his hand to block him. Master Zhang, please be patient. Zhu Manlong knew that Zhang Chao's only son was beaten and killed by the wolf guard for making trouble in the street. He had a blood feud with the wolf guard but could only suffer in silence. Now he found an opportunity to relieve his hatred, so he naturally wanted to take action. But in the Li family's Bama village, if it was an ordinary gangster who interfered, he would be beaten and killed, and then he could just put on the charge of trespassing. The wolf guards directly obey the orders of the current emperor, and their duty is to monitor the various princes and the forces of the underworld. The Li family of the loyal and brave Marquis is also within the scope of supervision. If the wolf guards are ordered to investigate Bama Manor, they will not be able to end the matter if they kill the wolf guards. It depends on how the master arranges it. As soon as the commotion in the underground palace occurred, someone went to report the news. When Zhang Chao and others rushed into the cage, Li Tianyu had already run over in anger. After hearing the manager's urgent explanation of the situation, he shouted, "They are gangsters pretending to be wolf guards. Kill them. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 34. The Li family of the loyal and brave marquis has been rooted in the capital for a long time, and their loyalty to the royal family is obvious to all. The investigation department cannot investigate the Li family on its own initiative. If the emperor is dissatisfied with the Li family, he will directly send the imperial guards to confiscate the family's property, and why would he send a small wolf guard to mess up the scene? It is for this reason that when Li Tianyu heard that the two wolf guards came to mess up the scene, he directly ordered the guards to kill them. The underground arena in Bama village must not be exposed, and even if the killing of the two wolf guards is investigated by the investigation department, it is nothing more than a matter of going to the door to apologize. Li Tianyu clearly distinguished which is more important and dealt with it very swiftly. Zhu Manlong heard that the Li family had spoken, so he naturally didn't say anything more. He and Zhang Chao were hired by the Li family. If something happened, the Li family would bear it. They just need to do their job. The gray-haired Zhang Chao was already furious. A few years ago, Zhang Chao's only son was drinking in a brothel and had a conflict with a gangster, which attracted the wolf guard. He was young and hot-tempered and had drunk a little. He was beaten to death on the spot after slightly bumping into the wolf guard. In the Dayu dynasty, breaking the law with force was a serious crime. Zhang Chao had martial arts but could only swallow his anger. He had been holding back his anger for several years. At this time, he didn't care anymore and rushed to the front with a one-handed knife in 2 steps. Tongbei fist and Tongbei knife are similar. Zhang Chao has practiced boxing for a lifetime. He can't be called a master, but he is definitely an expert. He has a fierce old knife, but in the blink of an eye, he has come to Su Buling's face. Su Buling's words are arrogant, but he is not careless at all. He holds a 4-foot precious sword in one hand and stomps his boots on the ground. The whole person is like being knocked out, with the blade behind and the body in front. He bends down to avoid Zhang Chao's knife, and the black blade has silently appeared in front of Zhang Chao's chest. The fight between masters is basically a matter of 3 or 2 moves. Who is stronger and who is weaker can be known at a touch. Zhu Manlong saw Su Buling's opening move and thought it was not good, the 8 methods of night fighting of Bagua knife. This was a move created by Zhang Xiang, the chief officer of the investigation department. It was created 10 years ago specifically to break the Tongbei knife of the Qi family in Yuzhou. He thought that only Zhang Xiang could do it, but he didn't expect that this masked young man could also perform it to perfection. Zhang Chao was indeed furious, but the alertness of a warrior made him not careless. He knew he was fooled as soon as the knife in his hand came out. Without thinking, he abandoned the knife and changed to palm, closing his hands and pushing horizontally with the golden dragon closing mouth, dodging the knife and hitting Su Buling's face. "Be careful." Zhu Manlong's face changed drastically. He knew that the opponent knew the move but still used it, basically hitting the edge of the knife. The various factions in the martial arts world restrained each other, and there was no routine that could win. Since this boy could break the Tongbei knife, the golden dragon closing mouth that he already knew should be easy to catch. Zhu Manlong's footsteps were as fast as an eagle spreading its wings and leaping up, wanting to rescue Zhang Chao who was trapped, but it was too late. But in the blink of an eye, while Zhang Chao abandoned his knife and changed to palm, Su Buling put away his knife and bent his knees, rising from the ground. Before Zhang Chao's 2 palms hit his chest, he kicked out with extremely powerful tiger mountain climbing, and his knee hit Zhang Chao's chest fiercely. Bang! The crisp sound of bones breaking. Zhang Chao wanted to change his moves but it was too late. He pressed Su Buling's legs with both hands slightly, and was hit by the knee in the chest. His whole body was directly lifted off the ground for more than 3 feet, and his face flushed instantly. Su Buling took advantage of Zhang Chao's evasion and slashed from bottom to top with his backhand. Smash! Blood flew. The two fought for only a moment, and the surrounding guards didn't even see the action clearly. Zhang Chao went from flying with a knife to falling to the ground. There was a big cut on his neck, and blood gushed out and fell to the ground without any movement. The knife-wielding guards stopped in their tracks when they saw this scene, and many spectators around turned pale. They had never expected that the master of Hutai Street would die so soon. What a powerful person he must be. Zhu Manlong, who could see the trick, was surprised at the high martial arts of the masked man, but he also noticed something wrong. If a martial artist is not careful in a fight, life or death is inevitable. It is true that the masked young man in front of him has learned a lot, but he uses clever strength to break the moves. The tiger climbing the mountain with a strong style just now can obviously be seen to be restrained. As an expert who has been immersed in martial arts for a lifetime, Zhu Manlong knows that this is a manifestation of the heart is willing but the strength is insufficient. Either he is injured and can't use his full strength, or other reasons limit his movements. Seeing this, Zhu Manlong narrowed his eyes slightly, and without hesitation, he gave up the eagle claw hand that he had practiced for a lifetime, and directly waved his old fists to attack Su Buling, without any routines, and did not aim at the vital points. He simply attacked and defended, relying on his brute force to make the opponent unable to resist. After Su Buling killed Zhang Chao, he returned a knife, but was dodged by Zhu Manlong. Without thinking, he swept his right leg horizontally and kicked Zhu Manlong's lower body. Bang! Zhu Manlong's fist hit Su Buling's chest, and Su Buling's body was hit backwards by the huge force, but his right leg kicked Zhu Manlong's left leg, directly hitting Zhu Manlong's unstable lower body, turning half a circle horizontally and falling to the ground. Zhu Manzi had been watching nervously, and when he saw Su Buling lose his balance after being punched, he rushed over and supported Su Buling's back from behind. Su Buling took advantage of the situation to stand up, took a big step and pulled himself up, holding the knife with both hands and slashing at Zhu Manlong who had fallen to the ground. Unfortunately, there was a place to take advantage of the impact when he landed. Zhu Manlong had expected a backhand, so he slapped the ground with his palm and rolled on the ground for a few rounds, pulling away. The guards present were all shocked. They didn't expect that the two masters who had been famous in Hutai Street for a long time could not even take 3 moves. Even Zhang Chao and Zhu Manlong suffered a loss. The guards who came from martial arts schools didn't dare to step forward to take the knife. They were stunned for a while. Su Buling was hit by a punch, and he continued to exercise vigorously. The severe pain in his chest could no longer be suppressed. It would not be worth it to continue fighting. After defeating the two masters, Su Buling did not linger in the fight. While the guards holding the knife were stunned, he turned around, hugged Zhu Manzi and ran out. Li Tianyu did not know martial arts, so he could not see the tricks clearly. Seeing the 2 embroidered pillows falling down in the wind, and the group of guards did not stop them, he was so angry that his face turned blue. He stood at the door and shouted angrily. "What are you all standing there for? Kill him! Kill him!" Su Buling's face was slightly cold, and he threw the long knife in his hand forward directly. The blade spun like a windmill, and chopped towards Li Tianyu with a terrifying sound of breaking the wind. Li Tianyu's pupils suddenly dilated, and he only had time to raise his hands to block. The whole person was hit by the 40-pound big knife and fell to the wall. He didn't even have time to scream. The whole place was silent. He didn't expect that this guy would kill even the cousin of the Li family. Zhu Manlong, who stood up, didn't even dare to chase for a while, and stood there hesitantly. Everyone was frightened by the murderous aura of killing whoever stood in their way, and their faces turned pale. How could anyone dare to stand in the way? Su Buling held Zhu Manzi in his arms, and passed by the table with the prizes. He did not forget to pick up a plate of silver and handed it to Zhu Manzi, and then ran to Li Tianyu's body, pulled out the long knife stuck in the wall and rushed out of the stone road. It's a test run, and one test determines life and death. Everyone, please come to Kidian and add bookshelf to vote for recommendation and support, thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 35. Scream, scold, roar. Chaotic sounds came from the underground palace. Outside the rockery of Bama village, Gongsun Lu rode a big horse and led a group of imperial guards into Zhuangzi, quickly approaching the rockery where the commotion occurred. Yesterday, after Li Tianlu learned that someone was interested in Bama village, just in case, he invited two people from Hutai Street to sit in the restaurant overnight, and the imperial guards armed with crossbows were mobilized outside to stand by at any time. For this kind of flattery, Gongsun and his son have always been the first to bear the brunt. Gongsun Lu personally came with the imperial guards. Hearing that there was really a riot in Zhuangzi, Gongsun Lu couldn't wait to claim credit from the Li family and rushed outside the rockery. He asked the imperial guards to draw their swords and crossbows, and he said loudly, "Bold thief, catch him quickly. Don't shoot, I'm from the detective department." From inside the cave in the rockery, a woman's call came out. As the footsteps of dong 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 dash sounded, Su Buling, masked in black clothes, rushed out of the rockery with Zhu Manzi in his arms, and stopped at the entrance of the cave. Zhu Manzi held the package in his arms and held up the token in his hand, fearing that when he went out, the imperial guards would rain down thousands of arrows. In the cave behind, the knife-wielding guard shouted from afar, "Sir, catch these two thieves quickly. They killed Mr. Li Tianyu and Li. They want to escape." Gongsun Lu was shocked. He didn't expect that the young cousin of the Li family was killed. This was a big deal. After thinking for a moment, he raised his hand and said, "Get it? If you dare to resist, shoot to death. Promise." The imperial guards held torches and official swords, and were ready to step forward to take someone. Zhu Manzi's eyes were full of astonishment. She naturally recognized Gongsun Lu, whom she had met once before. Perhaps she felt that the scene seemed familiar, and she didn't know what to say for a while. Su Buling's eyes were bloodshot, his chest was covered with poisonous hair and his forehead was already blue. If his identity is exposed, Zhu Manzi will definitely be noticed by the Criminal Investigation Department, and his subsequent plans will be ruined. He hesitated for a moment, then prepared to fight out with a knife. Fortunately, the commotion in Zhuangzi was relatively large and had already alarmed many people. When Xiaoting, who was enjoying the day and night, heard that someone was dead outside, he knew that Su Buletinling must be causing trouble, so he hurried over. Xiaoting saw Su Buletinling covered in blood from a distance and was so frightened that if he came out with Su Buletinling would die. He would probably have to go back to Huainan and think about it for the rest of his life. How could he not be afraid? Xiaoting hurried to the rockery, jumped up and slapped Gongsun Lu on the back of the head. Snap! The force was not strong, but it stunned the unprepared Gongsun Lu. He pressed the knife on his waist and turned his head angrily. "Who the hell is so, Yushulinfan?" It turns out to be Mr. Xiao, disrespectful and disrespectful. Gongsun Lu's expression changed completely, and he raised his hands in fear. Xiaoting looked at the imperial guards who drew their swords and raised their crossbows, and cursed angrily. "It's all reversed. Do you know who he is?" Su Buletinling's heart sank, and he quickly pinched Zhu Manzi's waist. Zhu Manzi was excited and answered quickly, "Mr. Xiao, I came here to investigate Bama village according to your instructions." Sure enough, there is a big case hidden underneath that shocked the government and the public. Xiaoting was stunned for a moment before he remembered what Su Buling had told Mrs. Lu not to know. He coughed and said with a cold face, He is my young master's bodyguard. I have long suspected that this White Horse village is harboring evil and evil. Today I brought the wolf guard here to investigate, and it turned out to be just as I expected. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, but he didn't expect Xiao Ting to be quite clever, and he knew all the official words. Gong Sun Lu naturally knew that Bama village was full of filth and evil. Compared with the Xiao family in Huainan, the Li family was not even a small finger. How dare he be partial at the moment? He continued, I see, Mr. Xiao is really aware of everything. After that, he turned around and scolded angrily. Imperial Guard, bring people in quickly and see what happens. The Royal Forest Army took the order and quickly rushed into the underground palace under the rockery. Su Buling leaned close to Zhu Manzi's face and whispered a few words, then he picked up the package in her arms and turned around to walk outside Bama village. With Xiao Ting covering him, Gong Sun Lu naturally did not dare to stop the masked guard for questioning. He just pretended that he had not seen him and bowed next to Xiao Ting. Mr. Xiao, Bama village is the property of the Li family. I take orders from my humble position. Everything has nothing to do with me. Xiao Ting looked like a prime minister with his hands behind his back, frowning as he looked at the cave under the rockery. What's hidden down here? Gong Sun Lu naturally shook his head sincerely. I heard that it's just a small industry, and I don't know about the humble position. Mr. Li from Kuishao Street is very interested in this place. I'm afraid you came here today and directly killed Li Tianlu's cousin. When Zhu Manzi heard this, he quickly trotted forward and raised his hands respectfully. Mr. Xiao, the Li family's act of feeding tigers with people in Bama village is not allowed by heaven. The Holy One loves the people like his own children, so he will be furious if he knows it. Today if you hadn't come here with your humble position to investigate, I don't know how many innocent people would have suffered. Now that the Holy One has been brought out, Gong Sun Lu naturally does not dare to talk nonsense anymore. He glanced at Zhu Manzi and felt that she looked familiar, but Zhu Manzi was wearing an ordinary coat and skirt from his daughter's house, so he didn't recognize her for a while. When Xiao Ting heard feeding tigers to people, his expression became really serious and he frowned and said, feeding live people to tigers? Can't the Li family afford meat? Zhu Manzi nodded angrily, young master, you will know once you go down. When Xiao Ting saw that Su Buling was covered in blood, he knew that there must be corpses everywhere down there, so he was willing to go down there. After waiting for a while, the leader of the Royal Forest Army ran out with a pale face, bowed and almost felt sick, and waited for a long time before speaking. Sir, there is an underground palace below, and many gentry were paralyzed in fear. There should have been a conflict just now. There are 5 bodies on the ground, all incomplete, and one of them was torn apart by a tiger. The scene was horrific. Although Xiao Ting's brain circuit was a bit problematic, he was definitely not unable to distinguish right from wrong. Doing such a thing under the feet of the emperor would surely shock the court and the public if it were spread out. Su Buling put such a big reputation in his hands, so he naturally had to take it. After listening to the report of the imperial guards, Xiao Ting was furious and waved his sleeves. As expected by this young master, the Li family dared to do such a heinous act under the feet of the emperor. It is really lawless. Come on, seal Bama Manor for me. Li Tianyu was killed, and there was no one in the manor to take the blame, so naturally no one came up to ask for leniency. Gong Sun Lu was afraid of being accused of condoning and shielding, so he could only denounce the Li family for being unscrupulous, and then he led a group of imperial guards to seal the entrance of the rockery tightly, not allowing anyone to come out. There were also many princes and nobles in the underground palace, all of whom were from prominent families, but no matter how prominent they were no more prominent than the Huainan Xiao family, and it was useless for anyone to come out to plead for mercy. Xiao Ting was a legitimate son of a noble family after all. If such a big thing was exposed, he would be upright and have a good reputation. If he let one or two of them go out of selfishness, not only would he be delayed for the rest of his life, but his political enemies would also catch him and take the opportunity to pull his father off the position of prime minister. He certainly did not dare to be partial. The imperial guard surrounded them like this, and when Chang'an City received the news, a large group of Tianziying wolf guards and the chief officer of the Dali temple arrived. The matter of Bama village could not be suppressed even if the emperor was present. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 36. It's snowing heavily, the east is white, and it's almost dawn. In the bluestone alley of Daifang, Su Buling, dressed in blood, was walking staggeringly holding a 4-foot-long knife. The blade of the knife rubbed against the bluestone ground and made a choo-choo dash sound. There was no one in the alley in the early morning, but there was no one. Get the attention of others. Last night in the underground palace of Bama village, killing tigers consumed a lot of people. In the end, he received an old punch from Zhu Manlong head-on. His body was strong and uninjured, but the cold poison in his body could not be suppressed. Long Suogu is a poisonous poison from Miao territory. The poisonous poison will be suppressed when exposed to strong alcohol. Otherwise, cold poison will be produced all the time to corrode the limbs and bones. Regardless of efforts, the blood vessels will burst and the 7 orifices will bleed to death. I have finished drinking the Danyuyaki in the gourd. Although the indescribable sting has been relieved a lot, it is still unbearable. Su Buling's steps were unsteady, and he exhaled bursts of mist in the severe cold of winter, and walked slowly towards Sun's shop. The cold wind picked up the dead grass and snow foam in the alley. The Sun's shop was dimly lit, and the old shopkeeper was putting down the benches from the table and arranging them neatly. Cha-cha. The sound of dragging the knife came from far to near. Shopkeeper's son frowned and wiped his hands with a towel. He walked to the wine shop and frowned to check. He saw a handsome man in black walking over with a 4-foot-long knife. His face was like a crown of jade, but dripping with blood. Shopkeeper's son has been running a wine shop in the alley all his life. Because the wine is good, heroes who come to the capital like to have a drink here. They have seen everyone and everything. There have been a few times where Jianghu people who were killed at night were covered in blood, who staggered over to drink a bowl of wine in the early morning, and then slept peacefully. Shopkeeper's son was about to turn around and warm the wine when he looked up and took a closer look, only to find that the man covered in blood was Su Buling. Ouch! Master, how did you end up like this? Shopkeeper's son was anxious and trotted forward, ready to help Su Buling. Su Buling curled up his lips, raised his hand and refused the support. He walked into the wine shop holding a long knife dripping with blood, sat down at the wine table near the alley, and breathed a long sigh of relief. Shopkeeper, bring me a bottle of wine. There was a lantern hanging in the wine shop. Shopkeeper's son used the firelight to look around, and he was relieved when he saw that Su Buling had no external injuries. Turning back to the stove, he fetched a warm wine bottle and walked over. Sir, what did you do last night? How could you, a rich man, kill someone yourself? Su Buling raised his hand to take the wine bottle, raised his head and drank heavily. The strong wine spilled from the corner of his mouth, washing away the blood on his chin and making his clothes wet. Gilug gilug. 2 small pots, but the bottom was seen in an instant. Su Buling let out a long breath and finally recovered. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, took off the small package tied to his waist, and threw it on the table, making a muffled sound, and the sound of silver colliding with each other. Sankei stole the shopkeeper's money. I was doing something last night and got it back for you. This. Shopkeeper's son was stunned on the spot. He turned his head to look at the bloody package on the table, and then looked at Su Buling, who was full of murderous aura. His dim eyes gradually became anxious and he slapped his knee suddenly. Ouch! Mr. Su, what are you doing? I just mentioned it casually last time, why do you need to spend so much effort to get the money back? How can you repay this favor? The wine tastes bad after you drink it? Already. With that said, he trotted to the stove, poured hot water and looked for towels. Su Buling sat on the stool and relaxed a little. The cold and tingling pain in his stomach gradually dissipated with the strong drink, and his face improved. He leaned the long knife on the wine table and chuckled. I'm just doing my own personal business. Shopkeeper's son doesn't need to be so polite. If you really want to return the favor, a bottle of wine is enough. Shopkeeper's son came over with a hot water basin and placed it on the wine table. That's what I say, but I still have to remember it. Jianghu people pay attention to grudges and grudges, but I am not a Jianghu person. Alas, I don't have anything else. When the young master comes over in the future, I will be in charge of the wine. Su Buling nodded in thanks, washed his frozen cheeks with hot water, and said with a chuckle, if you don't pay for drinking, you will be embarrassed to come here in the future. Shopkeeper's son opened his mouth. After dealing with people all his life, he knew that it would be useless to talk to such a young man with a heroic spirit. At the moment, he could only smile and nodded, thought for a while, and said again. This little old man has been running a wine shop for so many years. This is the first time he has met a person like the young master. He is much more cheerful than those heroes who talk about benevolence and righteousness. Su Buling curled up his lips, that's because I don't break the law by killing people, and ordinary people can't feel happy. Shopkeeper's son shook his head, but he had nothing to say. After resting for a moment in the wine shop, Su Buling hugged the blood-stained knife with a cloth, got up and walked towards Kuishao Street. Shopkeeper's son walked outside the wine shop and watched until his back disappeared. Then he shook his head and smiled, put away the packages on the table, and continued to walk around the small wine shop as before. At the far corner of Qingxi Alley, Ning Qingyi, who was wearing a fox fur coat, was holding onto the stone bricks of the blue wall, watching the scenes happening in the wine shop intently. After leaving the wine shop yesterday, she still wanted to wait for the frail and foolish prince to come over, but shopkeeper's son refused to accept her money and said that she was not as good as the man who abandoned his wife and daughter. She was a little angry and did not want to go to the wine shop again. Paved. Ning Qingyi came over and waited at the corner of the alley as soon as the shop opened today. As she expected, the silly prince would come over every day to get a pot of wine, but what she didn't expect was that Su Buling was covered in blood and staggered over with a long sword. She knew that Su Buling was infected with the dragon-locking goo, and if he got angry, he would suffer a lot of pain, so she thought Su Buling had encountered something last night. It wasn't until she heard the conversation between Su Buling and manager's son that she understood the reason. Su Buling also heard about the wine shop clerk who angered his parents to death and stole the money of his benefactor, so he ran to get the lost silver back. 200 taels of silver was not even a drop in the bucket for the prince of a vassal king, and it seemed a bit inexplicable to spend so much effort. But when Ning Qingyi saw this scene, she understood why manager's son said that she was not as good as her father who had long disappeared. Jianghu people pay attention to helping when they see injustice on the road. Seeing poor people suffering, drawing a sword to help and taking back the silver without asking for a penny, this is called chivalry. Seeing poor people suffering, paying out of your own pocket to make up for the deficit, this is called charity. They are all kind-hearted and respected, but not everyone is willing to accept charity. Just like shopkeeper's son, who has a skill and will not starve to death, and will not accept charity, so he will not accept her silver. But it was shopkeeper's son's silver. Su Buling took it back and asked for a pot of wine as compensation. Shopkeeper's son accepted it reasonably and felt comfortable. To put it bluntly, She is just a girl with a little kindness no matter how high her martial arts skills are, and she can't be compared with a real Jianghu. Ning Qingyi blinked her eyes, her cold eyes seemed to understand something, and after watching Su Buling leave, she wrapped her fox fur tightly and walked slowly back to the empty yard. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 37. Dong Dong. The morning bell rang throughout Chang'an, and the palace gates of the majestic imperial city opened wide. Officials and minor officials dressed in various colors of court uniforms walked neatly through the white stone imperial road and entered the Tai Chi Golden Palace in the center of the dynasty. The golden melon warrior stands in the flying snow, making the carved golden palace look solemn and solemn. Under normal circumstances, the civil and military courtiers standing in the golden palace should wait with bated breath for the emperor to come out of the side palace. At most, they would make eye contact with each other to discuss what they would report later. But this morning, the atmosphere in Tai Chi Hall was completely different, even a little noisy. You're so unconscionable. Your entire Li family is nothing. Do you think you have any respect for kingly law? The loud curses resounded through the golden palace, and they were so angry that they drowned out the whispers of the officials. The one who started the scolding was naturally Yang Guan Zingan. Zingan was originally a weak scholar, but at this time he rolled up his sleeves and wanted to rush up and beat the loyal and brave Marquis Li Beiyi, who was standing in the military attaché team with his board. The officials next to him all tried to comfort her, but of course, their words of comfort also cursed the Li family for not being a thing. No one who dares to be a public official is a coward, and there is no dust in his eyes. Even the emperor sitting on the dragon throne dared to scold him, let alone a young prince. In front of the golden palace, Prime Minister Xiao Chuang closed his eyes and concentrated, with no intention of stopping him. Xiao Chuang has sword-shaped eyebrows and a hooked nose. His eyebrows are quite majestic. He is the backbone of the Xiao family in Huainan and the backbone of the Daiyue court. He is only 45 years old and has served as prime minister for 20 years. In addition to giving birth to Xiao Ting, his image is tarnished. Everything else is impeccable. Next to Xiao Chuang, Lieutenant Lu Pingyang, Zi Sunaishi Luchingan and others also looked on with cold eyes and did not respond. Li Beiyi's face turned red and he lowered his head as he was scolded by a group of officials. He didn't dare to retaliate even if he was wrong, but his head was covered in sweat in the winter and he wiped it with his sleeves from time to time. Tread. The sound of footsteps sounded from behind the golden palace, and the golden palace fell into solemn silence as everyone bowed. Eunuch Chia, the eunuch in the palm of his hand, held a fly whisk and spoke with a male duck voice. Sheng Chao. The voice was not sharp, it was even very deep, and could be heard by the petty officials waiting for summons outside the palace gate. Inside the door of the side hall, Emperor Songji, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, walked quickly through the steps above the golden hall, waved the hem of his dragon robe, and sat on the dragon chair, frowning with a somewhat displeased expression. Songji was only 40 years old. He was the elder brother of Song Yu, king of Yan. Compared with the previous monarchs of Daiyue, he was relatively diligent. After the queen died of illness a few years ago, he did not establish a queen. He did not even leave the palace and was busy with government affairs day and night. His political achievements and skills can overpower a group of vassal princes, and his prestige is very high. See Your Majesty. Hundreds of officials held what tablets and bowed their heads in unison. You could hear a needle drop in the golden palace, and blurred reflections could be seen on the smooth floor tiles. Tada! Sweat dripped on the floor tiles, and Li Beiyi remained motionless, not even daring to breathe. The silence lasted for a moment, and then Songji raised his hand. What's going on in White Horse Village? The murder case in Bama village last night had been reported back to Chang'an City, and reached the emperor's ears through the detective department in the middle of the night. In the early morning, Dozens of wealthy gentry and officials' children who participated in the gambling game were all suppressed by the imperial guards. Also brought back were more than 30 incomplete skeletons and 5 corpses, as well as tigers and bears in iron cages. Chang'an has a population of 1 million, and many warriors die in private fights every day, but this is the first time such a nasty thing has happened. If the common people in the city knew that the prince who lived on Kuishao Street actually let the poor people fight tigers for fun, many officials standing in the Golden Palace would probably be drowned in spittle. The emperor spoke, and Xiao Chuang took a step forward, bowed and spoke. Your Majesty, yesterday Quanzi heard that there was something strange in Bama village, so he took a wolf guard from the detective department to check it out. It turned out that there was a secret basement under Bama village, and a gambling house was set up in it, where people and animals compete. I basically knew what I said, Xiao Chuang just repeated it. Li Beiyi waited for the prime minister to finish speaking before he came out, knelt down and said mournfully. Your Majesty, I have failed to teach my son the right way, and I have betrayed the love of your Majesty. Your sin deserves death. Please punish me, your Majesty. Punishment. Songji frowned and patted the armrest of the dragon chair. Nearly 40 people died. I've killed all 9 of your clans. The words were a bit harsh, and Li Beiyi turned pale with fright. He touched his head to the ground and trembled. Your Majesty, calm down, the guilty party will not escape the blame for what happened at Bama village, but those people are all gamblers and have already signed their life and death certificates. You farted, and people were caught by you, and they signed whatever you wrote. Qi Xing'an had a bad temper and immediately started to curse. After that, the civil and military officials began to argue. The Li family could not escape the blame, but it was still a bit measured. The people killed were all market bugs with dirty roots, and the status of life and death was also something the imperial court tacitly approved of. It would obviously not be appropriate to kill the Li family whose ancestors had served as protectors based on 40 lives. Songji's words were serious to show that he had no intention of protecting the Li family for selfish reasons, and he didn't speak much after that. There are also many officials who have good relations with the Li family. The eldest son of the Li family is still guarding the border, so it is not good to impose excessive penalties. After a fiery argument, the Li family was finally saved. Li Beiyi was fined only 3 years' salary and his land in Bama village was taken back. His son made a big mistake but was young and ignorant. He served in the Corvée for 3 years and was banned from being an official for life. He came up with an idea. The councillors and retainers beheaded in public to calm the people, even if this matter is understood so well. Thank God that Li Beiyi could save his son's life. If he dared to say more than a few words, he would be punished honestly. And Xiaoting, who made a great success this time, attracted many officials' attention. They praised him highly in the court, but they were a little confused in private. Xiaoting's reputation in Chang'an City is well known to everyone. He never made big mistakes but kept making small mistakes. He had basically no talent. Moreover, the wealthy families in Kuishao Street basically knew that he was a coward and loved to cry in front of the Queen Mother. It was a bit abrupt for a playboy who had no knowledge to suddenly go to Beimazhuang to advocate for justice. In the morning, Xiaoting came back with the imperial guards and the wolf guards. Even the Xiao family thought that Xiaoting had made a big mess. They were afraid that Xiao Chuang would not care, so they sent people to the palace to ask the Queen Mother for mercy. Finally, after understanding the cause and effect, no one believed that Xiaoting did it. After all, the killing was too decisive, which was not like Xiaoting's style. There were many retainers in the Xiao family who could kill a tiger with one sword, but the retainers had to listen to the orders of the head of the family before they would act. According to Xiaoting's temperament, if he knew about the White Horse Manor, he should have gone to the Queen Mother to ask for credit. However, at this point, the court officials could not question Xiaoting, and could only secretly suspect that it was Xiao Chuang who instructed Xiao Ting to do such a big thing to wash away his reputation of unlearned and incompetent. The Xiao family naturally knew how much their stupid young master weighed and how much he could do. It was impossible for him to do such a feat. No retainers followed Xiao Ting out yesterday. There must be a master helping behind the scenes. However, who this master was, the Xiao family really couldn't figure it out for a while. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 38. Snowflakes fell on the eaves of the palace. Madame Lu and the Queen Mother sat upright on the chairs in the gorgeous living room, with a bit of strange expressions, looking at Xiao Ting, who was sitting opposite them with a smug look. Something happened this morning. Madame Lu thought that Xiao Ting had caused a big disaster. Xiao Ting's mother couldn't come forward, so she asked her daughter-in-law to go to the palace to ask the Queen Mother for mercy, so as to prevent Xiao Chuang from being angry and slapping Xiao Ting to death. Although Madame Lu looked down on Xiao Ting, he was her husband's brother-in-law after all. It was true that he was usually unlearned and unskilled, but he had never made a big mistake. She still rushed into the palace to find the Queen Mother. The result was good. Sweeping away the gangs and eliminating evil, Xiao Qingtian. It was even more exaggerated than Su Buling's last crackdown on the illegal salt case. Now the princes and nobles are no longer arrogant, but have become brave. The Queen Mother knew Xiao Ting's temperament very well, and she didn't believe that Xiao Ting could do such a big thing of not fearing power and standing up for the people. At this time, holding the teacup, her beautiful eyes were scrutinizing. Xiao Ting, tell me the truth, who gave you the idea? Xiao Ting was full of righteousness. He was finally praised by the civil and military officials for being upright and not disgracing the family. He was not satisfied yet, so how could he push the credit away again? Moreover, he went deep into the tiger's den to cover up last night, and he should have been the first to take the credit. At this time, he was not willing to tell the truth, and said very aggrievedly, "Aunt, I am your nephew, what's wrong with me doing a good thing? What's wrong with me getting rid of harm for the people?" Mrs. Lu and the Queen Mother were both helpless, and it was really hard to say anything. After all, Xiao Ting was indeed in Bama village yesterday, and he did a good thing that was praised by thousands of people. It was impossible to turn around and scold Xiao Ting. Madame Lu pondered for a moment and asked, "Who was the masked swordsman you brought last night? I heard from the Imperial Guards that he was so skilled in martial arts that he could fight a tiger alone, and he also killed and injured 2 martial artists on Hutai Street. There are only about 10 of your family members who have this skill, and none of them went out with you last night." Xiao Ting was instructed by Su Buling last night, and he also knew that Madame Lu didn't like Su Buling to kill people. Now, seeing that he had done a great deed for nothing, he was very loyal. He is a friend from the martial arts world, just an unknown person. Madame Lu frowned. She knew that Su Buling had a good sword, and she actually suspected that Su Buling was behind it. But if this matter was revealed, it would definitely make Su Buling's reputation even higher. She didn't say anything more and got up and went out of the palace to find Su Buling to ask him in person. On the other side, after the morning court was over, the ministers left the Suzaku gate one after another with some doubts. Emperor Songji returned to the imperial study, and all the palace maids and eunuchs withdrew, leaving only eunuch Xia. The imperial study was filled with incense, and a painting hung on the wall, showing a woman in palace clothes. The imperial desk was filled with memorials submitted from all over the country, and the drafts of poems submitted a few days ago were placed in the corner of the bookshelf. The first piece of rice paper was the poem "My Prime Minister Daddy." Songji glanced at it and didn't even have the interest to pick it up. This year, there was a severe drought in Shu, and a scandal that damaged the face of the court had just occurred. Songji was not in a good position to appreciate poetry at this time, and sat down in front of the chessboard by the window, where there was an unfinished game of chess. Eunuch Jia was humble, sat down opposite the chessboard, and played chess with Songji seriously. Eunuch Jia looked skinny, like an old man in his twilight years, but he was able to serve Songji personally, so his identity was definitely not simple. It has been 60 years since Eunuch Jia entered the palace when he was young. He followed Emperor Xiaozong into Chang'an, watched Su Lai become a king, served the late emperor for his whole life, and then served Songji. He has always been the guardian of the palace. Dayu has many outstanding warriors. Northern Qi, South Yu, and even the princes and clans in various places have sent assassins to sneak into the palace to assassinate the emperor. If it weren't for Eunuch Jia who always stayed with him, the emperor of Dayu would have died countless times. Songji played with the white pieces on his fingertips, but he didn't make a move for a long time, and he was a little absent-minded. Eunuch Jia smiled softly and said respectfully, "Your Majesty has already made his move, why are you hesitating?" Songji was silent for a moment and shook his head. What happened last night was not done by Xiaoteng. He could not see through the situation, so he was naturally hesitant. Never mind, there must be a plan behind this, just wait and see what happens. Eunuch Jia nodded slowly, put the chess piece on the jade plate, and said no more. It was past noon, and the luxurious carriage stopped outside the Suwang mansion. Yunu reached out her hand to help, and Madame Lu got off the carriage and walked into the palace gate. There were not many people in the Suwang mansion. 8 palace guards stood outside the gate to show off. At this time, they raised their hands and bowed seriously. "Madame Lu, you wait outside." Madame Lu asked her entourage to stop, took the vermilion food box from Yunu, stepped onto the stone steps in her beautiful palace boots, and saw a figure in her peripheral vision. Turning her head, she saw a female wolf guard in black looking around the corner of the palace. After seeing her eyes, she turned around and disappeared on the street. Madame Lu frowned slightly. It was common for the detective department to monitor the princes and dukes, so she didn't take it to heart. She walked into the quiet and empty palace mansion. As the new year was approaching, other gates on Kuishao Street began to decorate and prepare for the new year, but the Suk Palace did not look festive at all. Even the exotic flowers and trees in the garden were not trimmed and grew in a mess, covered with thick snow. Madame Lu walked through the corridors and buildings to the main courtyard of the back house. Lao Xiao had a brazier at the door of the study, and his crutches were placed on his knees to warm himself by the fire, half closed his eyes and felt drowsy. After seeing Madame Lu, Lao Xiao chuckled and got up and left. The bedroom door was closed, and it was obvious that he had not gotten up yet. Mrs. Lu frowned. She knew Su Buling was very self-disciplined. If he couldn't get up in the morning, he must have gone out to do something last night. Thinking of this, Mrs. Lu's face darkened a little. She pushed open the door and entered the bedroom. In a blink of an eye, she saw Su Buling lying on the bed between the curtains, sleeping with his eyes closed. The wine pot was casually placed on the stool at the head of the bed, and one of his boots fell over. It was obvious that he fell asleep immediately. With the sound of the door opening, Su Buling opened his eyes. After a moment, he regained his clarity, turned his head and took a look, and then sat up quickly. "Aunt Lu, why are you here?" "I accidentally overslept." Su Buling's handsome face was smiling a little, and he yawned, as if he had really overslept and just woke up. Madame Lu frowned slightly, walked over with a food box in her hand, sat down beside the bed, and looked at Su Buling seriously. "Did you go out last night?" "Well, I went out for a walk and came back late." "Did you go to Beimachuang?" Facing Madame Lu's scrutinizing eyes, Su Buling was a little helpless. "It's a private matter, it's hard to talk about it." "What private matter can you have?" Madame Lu looked serious, put the food box on the small table next to her, and stretched her slender hand to Su Buling's collar, trying to untie his close-fitting white clothes. Su Buling grabbed Madame Lu's wrist and smiled awkwardly. Aunt Lu, I'm 18. You're not a girl, what's wrong with taking a look? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 39. Mrs. Lu frowned and glared seriously. A bit of dissatisfaction rose on Feng Yun's cheeks. She raised her jade hands and forcibly opened Su Buling's top. Su Buletinling was helpless and honestly spread his hands. The strong muscles on the chest were clearly defined, and there was an obvious bruise on the ribs, which was caused by Zhu Manlong's fierce punch. Although the muscles and bones were not injured, the body was relatively weak due to the poison, and it would definitely not be able to recover in a short time. The black and blue scar as big as a palm is like a ball of ink stained on the white rice paper. Mrs. Lu's ferocious expression suddenly turned into distress, and her eyes were filled with anger and urgency. Why are you so disobedient? She raised her hand and wanted to slap Su Buling a few times, but was reluctant to do so, and instead wanted to call someone to call the imperial doctor. Come over. Su Buling quickly raised his hand to stop. It's just a minor injury. It will be fine in a few days. There is no need to mobilize troops. Mrs. Lu was born into a prominent family since she was a child. She had never even seen a chicken being killed. When she saw the baby she wanted to hold in her mouth, she was so seriously injured. How could she bear it? Your chest is bruised and there are minor injuries. You were poisoned and you can't get angry. Even after I promised you to go fishing in Qujiang Pond, you are still restless. You went to Bama Manor to kill me and the blood flowed like a river. Do you think you are a prodigal? Mrs. Lu spoke harshly, but her face was full of nervousness. She carefully helped Su Buling lie down, took out the always prepared medicinal wine from the cabinet, and gently applied it on Su Buling's chest injury. Su Buling lay there obediently, looking at the mature cheeks leaning over him. They were as moist as warm jade, and their red lips were like vermilion. His light breath blew on the skin on his chest, making it numb and itchy. He coughed lightly and said with a smile. I'll be honest. Didn't I do a good job last night? Xiaoting is responsible for my reputation. I just eliminate harm for the people without leaving a name. Mrs. Lu pinched his arm angrily. Even if the Li family's crime is unforgivable, you can just say hello to the yamen, or tell me that I can go say hello. Do you have to go there and take the risk yourself? You still want to take advantage of the tiger. If you force yourself to vent your anger and hurt your heart, don't you know what will happen? Facing Mrs. Lu's reproach, Su Buling smiled and nodded. I know, I have a sense of propriety. Mrs. Lu snorted lightly. You keep saying that every time, but you don't take it seriously afterwards. One day it makes me so angry that I stand by you and stare at you every night to see if you are scared. Su Buling frowned slightly. What are you talking about? Aunt Lu is young, beautiful, and virtuous, with a gentle and considerate temperament. A serious series of sweet words. Mrs. Lu gave an annoyed look and was reluctant to lecture any more. She picked up the food box from the side and opened it. There was a plate of longan inside. Mrs. Lu opened the longan with her slender fingers, revealing the white and jade-like flesh. I just went to the Queen Mother's place to teach Xiaoting a lesson together. Humph. The Queen Mother looked serious, but in fact she must be very proud in her heart. She felt that Xiaoting would do the right thing. Come on, he said, twirling his fingers and bringing them to Su Buling's mouth. With helpless eyes, Su Buling sat up and opened his mouth to catch the longan. I knew at that time that it was you who was behind the scenes. With Xiaoting's virtue, even if he had 100 courages, he wouldn't be able to do what happened in White Horse Village. I just couldn't expose it. I thought about it for a while and said something about the family's shortcomings. Mrs. Lu is a widow with no children at home. She has a high status but cannot participate in politics. The only person around her who can talk is Su Buling, so she is inevitably a bit clingy. Although Su Buling always hid, he would never show any impatience if he was really caught. He would talk to Mrs. Lu about these trivial matters very seriously. Xiao Ting just lacks strength, and he is not a bad person. He is the nephew of the Queen Mother, so the Queen Mother is naturally partial to him. While speaking, Su Buling sat up, raised his hand and pressed Mrs. Lu's shoulder, rubbing it gently and slowly. Mrs. Lu straightened her back and almost dropped the longan in her hand to the ground. However, she soon recovered as before. She turned her head and glanced to make sure that there were no evil thoughts in Su Buling's eyes before she accepted the offer with satisfaction. Be attentive. By the way, on the first day of the 12th lunar month, the concubines in the palace went to Qujiangpan to enjoy the snow. Several ladies from Kuishao Street inevitably followed them, and I had to go too. I can't talk to them, so you can accompany me. I went over to a bunch of young women and did whatever they wanted. Those ladies from official families were just like nymphs. Not happy. Mrs. Lu turned her head, face to face, a little close, and then slightly apart, showing a bit of dissatisfaction. Su Buring could not say anything and nodded. I will definitely listen to Aunt Lu's words. Humph. Mrs. Lu then retracted her dissatisfied expression. After chattering on and on until a box of longan was eaten by two people, Mrs. Lu stopped talking and stood up to say, "Have a good rest and don't go out and mess around again. If I hear your good reputation. When I hear my good reputation again, I will stew myself in an iron pot." Su Buletinling nodded seriously. Mrs. Lu pursed her red lips and put away the food box. "Don't lie to me again." She walked out slowly. Su Buring breathed a sigh of relief and lay down again, holding his head, but he didn't feel sleepy. After thinking for a moment, Su Buling suddenly felt something was wrong. He raised his hand to his nose and smelled it, raising his eyebrows lightly. Xian Zizai's Yu Gong Gui, why does it use the same fragrance powder as the one named Song? Is it possible that this is popular recently? At the end of Kuishao Street, outside the mansion of the Zhongyonghao Li family, a brigade of imperial guards arrested two self-independent retainers into a prison car. Li Tianlu, wearing civilian clothes and a gloomy face, walked into a prison car and went to the quarry outside the city to do corvée labor. The wealthy families on the street did not add insult to injury. Those who could live on Kuishao Street, even the Li family, who were at the bottom of the pile, could not arrive at a push. They might soar into the sky one day. For the sake of reputation. Offending someone quickly is a big no-no. Gongsun Lu and Gongsun Ming, father and son, failed to help the Li family last night. They must come to escort them in person today, and apologize to the Li family to avoid bringing hatred on themselves. Gongsun Lu took it upon himself to act as a pawn for Li Tianlu last night, which made him a mess. However, Gongsun Ming was very angry. At this time, he kept scolding in a low voice. "You weak-sided thing, you've heard that something is wrong in White Horse Village, but you still shamelessly posted it. Wasn't it enough that you suffered a loss last time? Do you have so many people under your command who are doing nothing? You have to show up on your own." Gongsun Lu was angry in his eyes, but he could do nothing about it. He bowed and said, "I know my fault, kid. The Li family has always kept a low profile in making friends with everyone. I thought it was just a casual errand, so I went there by myself. I didn't expect that the Li family would hit Mr. Xiao with his head on his knees, and the Li family is so ruthless." Gongsun Ming stroked his beard and thought for a moment. It didn't look like Prime Minister Xiao's style last night. The Xiao family doesn't look down on the Li family at all. If Prime Minister Xiao is angry because he knows about Bama village, he can let young Master Xiao lead his troops. Just go over and search, there is no need to go deep into the tiger's den. Gong Sun Lu also felt that Xiao Ting's appearance last night was a bit strange. Master Xiao always does everything in the capital, except for serious matters. He was so vigorous and resolute last night. If it weren't for Prime Minister Xiao's guidance behind his back, then, who is it? Gong Sun Ming walked back and forth with his hands behind his back. You said last night, there was a guest of the Xiao family and a female catcher from the Wolf Guard. That's right, the female detective happened to bump into Prince Su in Daifang last time and solved the illegal solved case, hissed Dash. Gong Sun Ming thought of something, and his eyes were full of astonishment. The swordsman yesterday, could it be Prince Su? This is too far-fetched. Prince Su is less serious than Mr. Xiao. The last time he killed the people, you forced him to do it? His reputation. Besides, Prince Su has been poisoned and cannot do anything. There is no need to pay such a high price to clean up the Li family. Gong Sun Ming shook his head. Idiot, to be an official in the capital, you need to grow your brains. Gong Sun Lu looked a little puzzled and moved closer. Gong Sun Ming thought carefully for a moment and then began to deduce seriously. Let's first assume that it was Prince Su last night. The Su family and the Xiao family don't care about the Li family at all. Last night Xiao Ting and Su Buling conspired to run away without the help of their families. What's the purpose of going to Duanma village? What is it? Reputation. Gong Sun Ming shook his head. The most important thing for children of aristocratic families is reputation. Su Buling and Xiao Ting are both playboys in the capital. No matter how young they are about to reach their prime now. If they continue to bear the reputation of playboys, how will they become officials in the future? The Prime Minister will definitely find an opportunity to clear their name. Gong Sun Lu touched his chin, as if he had some enlightenment. There is some truth. If this is really the case, why didn't Prince Su show up last night? Well. Gong Sun Ming's face was full of hatred that iron could not be turned into steel. Make the best use of everything. Today, everyone in the court is praising Mr. Xiao for his uprightness. This is Mr. Xiao's reputation. After a few days, I will find an opportunity to pull Prince Su out. In addition to the reputation of eliminating harm for the people, I will also have the reputation of having a city at heart and not focusing on false reputations. Kill two birds with one stone. If Prince Su had jumped out last night, Mr. Xiao would have nothing to worry about. Gong Sun Lu suddenly understood and nodded. What if the swordsman last night was not Prince Su? My dear, you are still too young. Gong Sun Ming stroked his beard and chuckled. If it is really just a disciple of the Xiao family and did not show up yesterday, then he will not show up in the future, let alone compete with Prince Su for that bit of fame. As long as the news spreads out, this matter was not done by Prince Su, it must have been done by Prince Su. What if Prince Su doesn't admit it? His Majesty Su will definitely not acknowledge such a good thing. The more he refuses to acknowledge it, the more he disregards false reputations. The Xiao family and Prince Su have some connections, and if they can enjoy the benefits, they will naturally acquiesce. After Gong Sun Ming thought about it carefully, he was shocked. Dad is really thoughtful, so what should we do? Let the news fly for a while. Gong Sun Ming looked up at the sky with his hands behind his back and sighed loudly. When the time is almost right, let's break the news first. When Su Shizi and Xiao Xiang saw that their father was so good at doing things, even if they didn't say it, they would remember it in their hearts. Father's good, this is called the way of being an official. Oh, I understand, kid. Thank you very much too. The meat is so delicious and the love is deep in my belly for the great rewards. Please feel free to cast your recommendation vote. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 40. In the next few days, Su Buling stayed at the palace, recuperating from his injuries and waiting for the news of the murder at White Horse Village to pass. According to the news, the major case in Bama village was solved, and there will be punishments and rewards. On that day, today's sun personally praised Xiao Ting, and Zhu Manzi, the wolf guard who made meritorious service in Bama village, was commended by the detective department and promoted to the rank of Tianzi. Zing Long Gui Crane Tail. After half a month of busy work, the original goal was achieved. The next step was to let Zhu Manzi enter the case file library on the basis of investigating the case and find clues to the dragon lock goo from the heavily guarded home of the Criminal Investigation Department. On the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, the weather cleared up, and the snow on the streets and squares of Chang'an City had not yet melted, making it slightly dazzling when viewed from the window. Su Buling walked to the window and stretched out, then saw Lao Xiao walking on the veranda with a cane, and he laughed from afar. "My young prince, the sun is nice today, it's time to come out and get some fresh air." Su Buring chuckled lightly, took the long sword from the study and hung it on his waist, and walked out with Lao Xiao. "I was hit by a punch and lay there for 3 days. If I don't figure out this dragon locking goo, I won't be able to do anything in the future." Lao Xiao followed with his cane. "A man can't say he can't do it." Su Buletinling's face darkened. He. After the old Zyaka said something fancy, he got down to business. The archives store various files from the 200 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China. In addition to Zhang Xiang, there are 2 leaders secretly in the Criminal Investigation Department. One is walking. The world is in a state of shock, and one person is secretly monitoring the princes, while Zhang Xiang has been in charge of the archives for many years. As long as Zhang Xiang is here, no one can read the files under his nose. We have to find an opportunity to lure Zhang Xiang out. Zhang Xiang has been famous for nearly 20 years. There are only a handful of people in Chang'an who can defeat him. "My young prince, please don't take it lightly." Su Buling nodded, got on his horse, and headed to Daifang. The warm winter sun shines on the green walls and white snow, and there are more customers in Sun's shop than before. Shopkeeper Sun only said that the money was found, and the Bluestone Alley was restored to its original state, and no one mentioned San K again. Tread. Horseshoes stepped on the bluestone pavement. Su Buling came to the door of the wine shop. "A glass of wine." "Okay, yo, the young master is here. I haven't seen you for a few days." "He looks a lot better. I have been worried about the old man for several days." Shopkeeper Sun took the vermilion wine gourd and filled the wine with a wine spoon skillfully. Su Buling held the reins and stood outside the guardrail of the shop, waiting quietly. The clear wine fell into the gourd, making a splashing sound. Before the pot of wine was filled, a crisp sound suddenly came from the alley. "Master." Her delicate throat is light and soft, and her voice is like the warm sun in March, hiding the unchanging ice and snow under the 10-mile spring breeze. Several drinkers in the wine shop stopped talking when they heard the sound, glanced sideways, and were stunned for a moment. The man's nature made them sit up a little straighter. Su Buling turned his head and saw Ning Qingyi standing not far from the shop, looking at him with a smile. Ning Qingyi changed out of the Jianghu attire she had worn during the previous 2 meetings, and wore a snow-white skirt. Her black hair was draped on her back like ink, and her temperament was pure and elegant. There was no makeup on her face, like a white lotus in the lotus pond. Because of her slender figure, the Qingfeng sword is not hung on the waist like a man, but is carried diagonally on the back, which makes the original frailty more chivalrous. But for such a woman, it is difficult to imagine her fighting. He looked so murderous, perhaps it would be more appropriate to describe him as immortal. Shopkeeper Sun raised his head and glanced, shook his head and joked, "I thought the girl and the young master were equally equal, but now it seems that the girl's family is indeed better looking." Su Buling took the wine gourd, led the horse to the front, and said with a chuckle, "Miss Ning, why haven't you left yet?" Ning Qingyi's figure had just reached the tip of Su Buling's eyebrows, which was relatively tall among women. She walked side by side slowly until they reached a quiet place in the alley before she responded. "His Royal Highness has been kind to me, but this little girl has nothing to repay." Would you like to pledge yourself to me? Ning Qingyi embroidered her shoes for a while, stepped on the bluestone floor tiles with a soft click sound, and pursed her lips, thinking about how to respond to this shameless bastard. Ha ha. Su Buling raised his hand. It's just a joke, girl, don't take it seriously. Ning Qingyi took a breath and continued to walk forward, but deliberately kept the distance between them half a step, so that they could be regarded as following Su Buling. Young master, if you have any difficulties, you can tell me. I can't help you with court matters, but I can still help with Jianghu matters. If not, I owe you a favor and send a message to Changqing in the future. Look, I will come to you. Jianghu people pay attention to grudges based on gratification. If the girl really wants to clear things up with me. That's not what I meant. Ning Qingyi stopped and looked at Su Buling. I don't like to owe favors. Su Buling nodded, led the horse and walked slowly. After a moment of silence, he got to the point. Girl, if you want to help, I'm really in a little trouble lately. Just say it. Haha, the locking dragon goo in my body was banned more than 10 years ago, and there is no such thing in the world. I secretly searched for a year and found no clues. It was not until a few days ago that I heard from the alchemists in the world. 10 years ago, Iron Eagle had a dragon-locked cup when hunting deer, and there may be records in the Criminal Investigation Department. When Ning Qingyi heard this, she tilted her head in confusion. You are the Crown Prince of Su, and your status is much higher than that of the detective department. Can't you just go and ask? Su Buling shook his head. I have been here for a year, and the court has asked the investigation bureau to track down the clues of the ambush in Weha River, but nothing has been found. If the investigation bureau really has information about the dragon locking goo, Ning Qingyi is not stupid. He immediately understood after hearing this. Is it possible that the court has done something to you? The imperial family is the most ruthless. It is common for brothers to kill each other, not to mention me, the son of a king with a different surname. If the investigation bureau really has information about the dragon locking goo and deliberately keeps it secret, then it must be the court behind it. I hope it is not true. If I find information about the dragon locking goo in the investigation bureau, I am afraid I will not be able to leave Chang'an City alive. Ning Qingyi frowned slightly. What did you do in Bama village a few days ago? I know the matter, and he is very good at martial arts. He can just run away if he knows there is danger. I am not a gangster. I can run away from the temple, and if the dragon locking poison is not solved, I will die if I return to Ziliang. What can I do for you? You have a grudge against Zhangxiang. I will find a chance to lure him out and give you a chance to avenge him. Ning Qingyi paused, with a bit of surprise in his eyes. Really? Su Buling nodded seriously. It's mutually beneficial. If you agree, the matter will be settled. It's a deal. Ning Qingyi did not hesitate at all. When you are ready, just notify me when you arrive at the courtyard last time. Su Buling chuckled and raised his hand to make a high-five gesture. Ning Qingyi had a strange expression on her face. She raised her hand, but didn't high-five him. She tossed her hair and left. By the way, your fox fur coat is still with me. I'll wash it and return it to you after it dries. It's for you. Su Buling withdrew his hand in dismay and watched Ning Qingyi disappear around the corner of the alley.